Good morning, and I welcome everyone to the second meeting of the Local Government and Communities Committee in 2020. Can I remind everyone present to turn off their mobile phones. Agenda item 1 is consideration of whether to take agenda item 3 in private. Item 3 is consideration of evidence heard today and 8th of January on the Period Products Bill. Are we all agreed? Yep. Thank you very much. That is agreed. Agenda item 2, the committee will hold its concluding evidence session on the Period Products Free Provision Scotland Bill. And today I welcome Monica Lennon, MSP, member in charge of the bill, Kirsty Louise Hunt, researcher, MSP staff, Scottish Labour Party, Claudia Bennett, solicitor, officer of the Solicitor to the Scottish Parliament, Mary Dinsdale, senior assistant clerk, and Andrew Milne, head of non-government bills unit, Scottish Parliament. And I would ask Monica Lennon, who introduced the members' bill, to make a brief opening statement. Monica.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, everyone. I welcome the opportunity to give evidence today, and I'd like to thank members of the committee for all the work on the Period Products Bill so far. Sadly, we know that period poverty is real and that period dignity is a struggle for too many. The aim of this bill is to ensure that all those who menstruate have the right to free access to period products. This bill has widespread support across Scotland. 51 MSPs from every party in this Parliament signed the final proposal that helped the bill get to this stage. And I'm grateful to the committee, the clerks and the Parliament's outreach team for your engagement with a wide range of organisations and individuals. I've heard good things about the Scottish Parliament workshop led by Graham Simpson, and I know about your visit to Perth this week, which I know was very well received. And last week I listened carefully to the Cabinet Secretary when she gave evidence in response to your questions. I do note her reservations about the bill, and I'm pleased to be meeting the Cabinet Secretary next week to work towards, I hope, a positive outcome. Despite her reservations, yesterday the Cabinet Secretary confirmed in writing to the committee that the Government does believe that period products should be made available to all those who need them. I welcome this and agree that this is an issue of both equality and dignity. I also congratulate Aileen Campbell on the initiative she's taken forward already in collaboration with local government, colleges, universities and the third sector, and also pay tribute to her predecessor, Angela Constance. On the fundamental question of a universal scheme versus a targeted approach, it's become clear that the Scottish Government does prefer a targeted approach, one that prioritises people on low incomes. However, I believe this risks missing out some of the people who struggle to access products but do not fall easily into the low income brackets. The committee's heard a range of evidence about how poverty can make it difficult to access period products, but you've also heard about other factors that impact period dignity. Health conditions like endometriosis, where heavy and irregular bleeding can result in a need for more products. Women with disabilities who are more likely to be pushed into poverty, women who've experienced miscarriage and baby loss, children and young people who don't have access to their own money or are not financially independent. And we heard from Engender in December about women acting as poverty managers, buying or sourcing products for other family members. All of them, as well as trans men and non-binary people, women and girls affected by gender-based violence and coercive control, and those in insecure work and zero-hours contracts could possibly miss out. That is why I believe we need to introduce a legal right of access for all. And whilst the bill is in my name, it has been powered by people outside of this Parliament and their grassroots campaigning. Today, more than 30 leading organisations have published an open letter in support of the bill, and I believe it's a constructive call to action to all MSPs to work together to support the general principles of the bill at stage 1. The bill goes further than current initiatives by proposing a statutory right to access free period products, as well as an obligation on key public bodies to provide those products for free to those who need them. I want to build on the progress made so far. This bill will enhance that work, not hinder it. Legislation is the only guarantee that current initiatives will continue and not be undone by any future administration. We can send a clear message that this Parliament takes period dignity and access to period products seriously. The bill sets a minimum standard both for a universal scheme and for specific provision in schools, colleges and universities. It doesn't prevent those bodies doing more than the minimum, and it doesn't prevent others from acting voluntarily. It gives government the freedom to design a universal scheme in the way it thinks will work best and to vary that over time to reflect experience. The government says the bill would be much more expensive than the financial memorandum suggests, and I'm more than happy to discuss costs. But to be clear, the financial memorandum sets out my costings in detail, drawn from Scottish Government information. But in contrast, I would say the Scottish Government has not set out workings for how its higher estimated costs have been arrived at. Where concerns have been raised about some aspects of the bill, I'm happy to look at amendments at stage 2. I've already indicated to the Cabinet Secretary changes I'd be prepared to make, for example, removing the requirement for postal delivery from the face of the bill. In conclusion, Convener, ultimately, this boils down to whether we are willing to do everything possible to ensure no one is denied period dignity. Are we willing to support a universal scheme, easily accessible by everyone who needs period products? It is ambitious because we would be the first country in the world to take this step, but it is the right thing to do. I remain hopeful that Parliament can agree to back the principles of the bill at stage 1. Thank you, Convener, and I look forward to the committee's questions.
Thank you very much. Can I ask then, you've already explained why you feel the legislation is necessary, but is this period poverty bill aimed at period poverty, or is it to be a universal rights bill? I mean, because they are surely two different things, and there's no clarification from what you say about what exactly your aim is here.
So I would say that, yes, without legislation, there's no guarantee that the current initiatives would continue. I believe that the bill and the policy memorandum and explanatory notes are very clear about what the bill is trying to do. I recognise that there is a difference between the government's targeted approach and what I'm looking to introduce, which is a right to free universal access, because I've outlined some of the people who could miss out if we only do a targeted scheme. So not everyone who is experiencing poverty will be referred to a food bank. They might not be in education. So there is a big gap. And I think the Cabinet Secretary recognised there is a gap and that period poverty is still the experience of many people. I'm sure you've heard that in your outreach work. So I'm not embarrassed to say that this scheme would be accessible to everyone, but through all the consultation work that we've undertaken, uptake would be low, it would be modest, because most people, most women and girls we've spoken to have said they can afford products and they have preferred brands, etc., and would continue to make those choices. But people recognise having a safety net for when people do find themselves in need because of health conditions, disability, caring responsibilities and so on, that this is the best way to do it.
Okay, 2 points from that. One is that the Cabinet Secretary not say last week that they were already looking at how they can expand for some of the areas that they might be missing out just now, and say in a letter to you that both of you are aiming for the same thing, which is to make sure that all those who can not afford period products will be getting them, will be able to get them. And the other thing is that it seems to me that what you're saying is that this is the point you made there about this being universal and there'll be a low uptake. It was made clear last week that the government expects young women or young people who are receiving these products at school will go on to expect to receive them when they leave school, when they become adults. And I think there's something in that. I mean, there's nothing more difficult than taking away something that somebody's already getting. Now, I don't know if you've taken that into account. I know that others are going to ask you more questions about cost, but I don't know if you've taken that into account fully in your financial memorandum.
There's a lot in this. I'll try and unpack some of that. So I think, as a principle, there is agreement between myself, the people who support the bill, and government that none of us want to see anyone in period poverty. We want period dignity for everyone, but my proposal goes further in that I want the scheme to be universal. The government right now are saying they want a targeted approach, but I recognise that the Cabinet Secretary is saying there is more to do and government is looking at rolling out further provision. I recognise that there will be some evaluation of the work that's been undertaken already. So I think we're going in the right direction, but I am saying that a universal approach is more inclusive because of the range of circumstances that we've heard about. It's not all about how much money they have in the bank necessarily, but it is about recognising some of the circumstances and stigma which make it difficult for some people to access period products. The provision within education settings, I mean, that comes from the information that I received from teachers through EIS, their trade union, about the levels of period poverty in the classroom. And fundamentally, that's about making sure that learners are there to learn and participate in sport, etc. They don't have to miss out because they can't access products. So the government has built on some good work that I know that Kenneth Gibson's aware of in North Ayrshire. So we've seen that bed in, and then the following year the Scottish Government worked with COSLA and others. We know there's good outcomes from that. But that is very much about during the school day or the college day, if you need a product, they should be available.
Once out of that school environment, when they've been receiving these products there, then they are not going to hit 16 or 18 or whatever age they are and expect to have to then automatically go and pay for these products. So more percentage of those people you would think would go on to be looking for free products if they were available.
Well, I think, again, there's a difference between when you have to go to the toilet to change a pad or a tampon, or you're caught short and you've got a bit of an emergency and you need to get out of class, and having access to a monthly supply. So within school, it's not all about addressing poverty. It's about recognising that throughout the school day, you know, your bag might be in the locker, you might be in an emergency situation, you have to get to the toilet. I know some schools are going further to make monthly supplies available if people want to take extra away, and colleges are doing that too. But the schemes that are developing in the community, my vision is that that's where we meet. If people do have a financial need, if people do have a longer term need, that they can get their monthly supply. And I won't say too much about my discussions with the Cabinet Secretary because those talks are continuing, but I think there was a recognition that at the moment it's those people who maybe need a bit more help in terms of perhaps having a monthly supply in the house, which is why
which would be why the Cabinet Secretary said last week that they're doing the review, and some of the steps they've already taken are to reach those that are in the community as opposed to in the education system. Listen, I'm going to bring Graham Simpson at this point.
Thanks, Convener. We're going to come on to costs in a little bit, but I just want to sort of focus on the main question that Parliament will have to consider is, do we agree with the general principle of the bill? And I'm struggling to understand what the general principle of the bill is. Given that you've said you don't think everyone needs universal access, but your bill actually creates that. So perhaps you could just clear that up for me initially.
So thank you for your question, because it is clear that we focus on the general principles, and the bill is clear that this is about making access to period products a legal right. That the way the bill is drafted, you'll recognise that that's very much an opt-in. So people are not going to be given lots of free stuff if they don't want it. It's very much about opting in, and the Scottish Government is doing some really good work to do an app to let people know where they can get products from. So there's a lot of work already underway. The bill would place a duty on ministers to develop a scheme by regulations, and I think we can see that there's a lot of good practice that we can capture already, but as I've said, there's no guarantee that work would continue in future. So if we believe that we want to ensure period dignity for everyone, the universal approach is the right one. The duty rightly would rest with ministers, and the bill also has provisions on education providers, schools, colleges and universities, and there's been no dissent in terms of that approach. I think people now recognise that young people and other learners should be able to readily access free products during the school day.
But you've said yourself that not everybody needs this, and we've heard, the committee's heard, and you've heard the evidence, you're well aware of it, the work the government's doing, which is a more targeted approach. And it seems to me, you know, maybe that's a better approach. Maybe that's something the committee will consider. Because if not everyone needs it, then you have a targeted approach, and you target it at people who do need it. Is that not a better way of doing things?
No, I think any route to sort of means testing, or which is what targeting is really about, there's that danger that you miss people out, and that's what I've addressed in my opening remarks. I think it's worth having a look at the evaluation of the Scottish Government's pilot scheme in Aberdeen. I've been to Aberdeen a couple of times now to meet with CFINE, who led on that work, and it was really clear that the people participating from that early scheme, which influenced what the government is doing now, said that they wanted it to be, didn't want it to be intrusive, they didn't want to be asked lots of questions or have to provide sort of financial information. We want to get away from people, you know, having to be directed to food banks to get period products. You know, we want to get away from that entirely. We want people to live a life free of poverty. But right now, that isn't the reality. So if people can access a scheme that's not in any way stigmatised, that is available for everyone, but to go back on all the work that we've done, people have said, this is a really good thing, I back it, but I wouldn't use it. And I'm really struck by something that we heard at the cross-party group on women's health by Professor Alison Scott, who's a gynaecologist based here in Edinburgh, and a leading member of the Faculty of Sexual and Reproductive Health Care. Hope I've got that right. And she talked about a service user in her clinic, a woman who has drug addiction, and while she was there, they offered her some free period products out of a basket, and she took one item, and she said, "Oh no, I won't take any more because other people need them." And I think for people who have experienced poverty, or you know, that kind of quality of life where sometimes you're living day to day, people in those situations, they don't abuse schemes like this. And I've been really heartened by lots of people like me who are on incomes who we can buy our own, but have said this is the right thing to do.
Sarah, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, just coming in about thinking about the concerns that the Cabinet Secretary expressed last week about the costs, and I'm kind of listening to you talking about a universal scheme that you opt in. It's thinking about, in your scheme, how you define where the limits are, because you're saying there's a personal approach where people will not take all the products that are available in a toilet, for example, but they'll use what they need. And it's trying to tease out the issue that's just been asked about, potentially snowballing of uptake and costs. Can you say a little bit more about that?
So the way the bill is drafted, it only applies to those who need the products. It's a framework bill deliberately because I think it's right to give freedom to ministers to basically devise the scheme. And this is not a new approach. This is very common in other legislation. I know members will have their own experience of that. In terms of limits, I know that colleagues might have questions about the idea of a voucher scheme, which is in the bill as ministers may do that, but I've heard the evidence on that. The reason why that approach was put in was because I know that there had been, originates from the sort of C-card model on access to free condoms, which is well established. And I know that some campaigners sort of took that and turned it into an S-card approach. And I know that, for example, that became SNP policy in 2016. So that had been quite popular. And I thought that ministers might, be attracted to having that option. But I've said I'm happy to that doesn't need to be in the bill. But in terms of the approach, what the bill says is that any scheme has to be cost-free and reasonably easy to access, so that is clear in the bill. In terms of sort of future uptake and cost, so the approach in the financial memorandum is to identify the unit costs. So per item, what is the cost of a pad, a tampon, a menstrual cup, a reusable pad, and again, we took figures from the Aberdeen pilot scheme and other Scottish Government documentation. So that's where we get to, you know, around 9 pence. Now, you heard from Hay Girls about their unit cost for a pad of 7.5 pence and between 9 and 13 pence for a tampon. And I think we all recognise that reusables are at the higher end. I think the government will need to be a bit more transparent about how they've arrived at their cost, because they haven't just looked at unit costs. Other things have been, I suppose, lumped in there. And I think there's a lot of assumptions about delivery, which again was only, you know, it's an option, and admin and so on.
Can I pick up the issue about postal delivery? Because
Yeah.
my reading of your letter to us is that, are you prepared to negotiate on that? Because there were
Yeah.
the things that were quite strong in the Cabinet Secretary's comments last week were postal delivery. If every pharmacy had to register, or every GP service had to register, you automatically rack up some costs. But those two things weren't in your initial bill, so I just want a quick comment on those.
Yeah, I mean, all of those examples, the bill doesn't mandate any of that. That's only if ministers chose to do that and to get pharmacies involved and so on. So the voucher scheme was a reference. It was only to limit what information could be collected in terms of people's sort of circumstances. That was an option. It doesn't mandate ministers. But your point about snowballing and so on, ultimately we all want to see culture change, and the Cabinet Secretary's made that clear. You know, she wants to see some of the voluntary work continue. You know, football stadiums, for example, the On the Ball campaign's been so inspiring, but they've said in the last week that it's 3 young women who are volunteers. They can't do that forever, and no one would expect football stadiums to provide someone's monthly supply if they found themselves in period poverty. But if we do start to change the culture, we will see more period-friendly workplaces like the one we're sitting in today, and that day-to-day access will improve. But where I think there's a real opportunity, and I know that MSPs who are not on the committee who've been speaking to me in the last couple of weeks, they really want to see the universal scheme really drive change in terms of sustainability and different kinds of products. And I know that, you know, the Moon Cups and reusable pads are becoming more popular. And if someone can access one of the menstrual cups, they won't need another one for arguably several years. And with all the awareness around, you know, climate challenge, I would say in terms of the bill and the campaign, most of the emails I get are related to why is more not being done around reusable. So I think there's a real opportunity to do that. And again, there's scope then for savings and efficiency. And I think you heard from North Ayrshire Council and their evidence that in the time they've been doing this in their schools and in community settings, they've become more efficient and costs have started to go down. And I think there's a lot to learn from that. And that's the kind of good practice we need to draw on.
Okay, can I follow that up particularly, because my next question is about that issue of flexibility and collaboration. You've talked about how different organisations are doing things differently. COSLA was really clear we need a localist approach, and the Cabinet Secretary was very unhappy about the concept of a universal scheme because it would automatically reduce flexibility and collaboration in her view. So what's your view on that? Having a national approach through legislation to ensure that period products are available, to what extent does your bill over-define, or to what extent is your bill a framework? And it's really to address directly the Scottish Government's concerns as expressed by the Cabinet Secretary.
I take a different view from the Cabinet Secretary. I don't think having legislation with provision that ministers get to design the scheme in consultation with others in any way would stifle flexibility or innovation. I just don't really accept that premise. I think we've seen a lot of collaboration, we've seen a lot of pioneering work. So, you know, when this issue, when I was first raising this in 2016, there was a little bit of like, oh, these things can't be done. And then some great things started to happen. So South Lanarkshire College, who are based in East Kilbride, said, we're just going to go and do this within our existing budget. And they did it. And then North Ayrshire Council, did the same, and then Dundee University did the same, and others. So that work was already underway, and they tested it. They said in terms of well-being and, you know, everything else, all the benefits, this is the right thing to do. And then the government have worked in partnership with COSLA and others, and we've seen it going well, that it can be improved. But if the government is committed to doing this now, then there's no sense that that work, you know, would fall away. They would continue to work and make sure that schemes are properly resourced. But the only guarantee is to put it into legislation. And I think that the way the bill is drafted, there's maximum latitude to ministers to devise a scheme and then improve it, adjust it in time.
Okay, my last follow-up on this one, because colleagues will be desperate to get in. So it's a framework bill. You've said schools, further and higher education. So, for example, what flexibility do local authorities and further and higher education institutions have about this? The issue of, I think you've talked in one of your responses about en-suites. You would remove them from a requirement, so it would be up to the student hall providers to decide what was appropriate. How far does that go at school? We got interesting and kind of different evidence from people when we spoke to them this week about accessibility at toilets or where in a school. Is that prescribed in the bill? To what extent does the framework enable different local authorities and different schools to do what's more appropriate in their area, that either doesn't fall below a threshold of this is not serious or this is over provision? How does that localism balance actually play out in reality?
Mm-hmm. So on the education part of the bill, the intention is that products will be available in toilets. I have said, again, willing to look at all of this. I mean, I think, again, it's to reinforce we want to establish the principle. We can hopefully get to stage 2 and make any amendments and improvements. So I think ideally access in toilets would be the best route, but I accept it perhaps within en-suite facilities and student accommodation perhaps is maybe not necessary. But again, there can be absolute flexibility because we're just at stage 1. I recognise the Cabinet Secretary's comments about, you know, some schools are feeding back that young people would prefer to be able to access products through the school office or through a school nurse. And I think that's important too, because there's a wider issue about menstrual wellbeing and education. I know that Endometriosis UK and others are very active on this, and there's some live petitions at the moment if you want to have a look. But if young people can have conversations with a nurse or a teacher about, you know, if they've got really bad period pain, it's getting to a point where actually this is maybe not normal, you might need to see a doctor, because we know that conditions like endometriosis it takes such a long time to get a diagnosis, and there's other issues, and also it's about making sure that not just girls but boys too have good awareness. They might have mums and sisters at home who need products too, or in terms of relationships with partners, understanding about menstruation and respecting young women and girls. So I think that if schools want to and are able to do a bit of both, you know, products in a toilet, in a basket like we have here in Parliament, or be able to pick some up in the school office, it's certainly not my intention to stifle any of that, and I don't see why the bill would do that. So again, we can look at these amendments.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Kenny, and then Graham.
Yes. Good morning, Monica. It's just on the issue of amendments. I mean, you said in your letter, and you've touched on it already this morning, that you said, I also understand concerns that have been raised about section 4.3 regarding postal delivery, and would be content to lodge an amendment which removes this from the face of the bill in order to give ministers maximum flexibility. And then also this morning you've talked also about removing the section on vouchers in response to questions there about toilets. So I'm just, for clarification, I'm keen to know what other amendments you would seek to bring to change the bill as it currently stands. And conversely, what areas of the bill to you are sacrosanct that you don't want to see amended under any circumstances?
I appreciate the question from Kenny Gibson. So basically at this stage I'm asking for support on the general principles. I'll be having further discussions with the Cabinet Secretary next week, and I've been very open in saying that, you know, I'm willing to approach that with an open mind and to talk about ways that we can improve the bill. And a couple of other members have approached me about some ideas they have, particularly around education and around sustainability and reusable products. So that's really encouraging, because it's not just my bill, it's the Parliament's bill. I think we all need to have that input. In terms of the part about the voucher scheme, you know, Kenny Gibson's right, and on postal, I'm willing to be flexible on that. Again, I just really need to reiterate that the way the bill is written, the ministers are not mandated to introduce a voucher scheme. It's there is that they may do that, and the only then requirement would be if they take that approach, it has to be cost-free and you know, easy to access. But again, it was just because in the early days around the campaigning, there was a lot of interest in that approach. But I think some people have felt, oh, a card, that's maybe not the best way. So I'm totally relaxed on that. And on postal, I'm aware that the C-card scheme on free condoms, some health boards do provide that option for postal delivery, and I know that it's good for, you know, people living in more remote areas. It's certainly not the intention that that's the way that everyone would access products. So I've said, because I understand some of the anxiety, you know, I would be happy to remove that from the bill. It doesn't mean that if the bill passes that, because of that localism that Sarah Boyack's talked about, if some providers felt they could do that and wanted to do that, because it might be cost effective in some of the island communities who we took evidence from. But again, absolutely, you know, that's something that I'm willing to be flexible on.
My concern is almost that you're willing to be too flexible. I mean, that's why I was saying what parts of the bill be sacrosanct, because you seem to be willing to change almost any aspect of it in order to get the bill through. And it then seems to me, what is the point in having a bill if at the end of the day the bill that's presented is not the bill in any shape or form that comes out the other end? That's why I was trying to ask you, what parts of the bill do you feel, no, I'm sorry, I'm just not willing to change that aspect of it, so we can get an idea of what the actual core values of this bill are? Because if you're willing to amend this and willing to amend that, and we end up with something which we just, it's too much of a movable feast for as far as I can see at this point. So that's why I'm trying to get from you, Monica, what to you is, no, I'm not willing to, this is where I am and I'm no shifting from this aspect of it. So, well,
the straight answer to that is the principle of universality. You know, this is about a right to access free period products, which is for everyone, because means testing and targeting risk missing out some of the people who do need the products. Some of the examples that I've given are very marginal to this bill. You know, postal delivery and ensuite toilets, that's on the margins. And again, these are maybe things that would be nice to have, because I know that evidence I've heard from groups who represent disabled people and carers and people living in remote communities, there's a perception that the postage would be the very expensive way to do it, but actually for people who struggle to get to, you know, to community centres and so on, that could help. But so that's not that the bill wasn't drafted to be about how do we post out period products or how do we get them into ensuite toilets and halls of residence. The bill is about the principle of universality, to make sure that we as a country can guarantee period dignity and can, you know, really tackle the issue of period poverty, which a few years ago no one was talking about because of the deep shame and embarrassment. We as a parliament have broken down many of those barriers, and, you know, I'm grateful to the work, you know, Kenny Gibson is a member of the cross-party group in women's health. So a lot of the women who would benefit, or a lot of the women that we engage with in that CPG, you know, who have endometriosis, you know, many of the women who experience different chronic conditions that intersect. So I think there's a recognition that inequality intersects in different ways, and sometimes it's the people who you wouldn't expect who find themselves struggling to access products. So there's no compromise on this side of the table in terms of the principle. I do disagree with the government's approach, which is to stop at targeting and not to move to a scheme that could be accessed by everyone, But in terms of things that might appear on the margins, postage, ensuite toilets, then you know, I'm happy to make some concessions.
Okay, it's just that you said you believe that there should be maximum latitude for ministers. You said that a few minutes ago. That's why I was trying to say what other things you would be happy to amend or indeed not amend. But I'll just say one other thing at this point, if I can, convener, which is, you know, in paragraph 2 of the bill, it says the period product scheme must oblige all or any of the following council specified public-facing bodies, other specified persons to make period products available, etc. And then it goes on in part 3, paragraph 11. You say public-facing bodies means bodies or other organisations appealing to the Scottish ministers to be bodies or other organisations to the premises of which the public or a section of the public has frequent access. So I'm just wondering if you can maybe just give us a wee bit more information. I mean, on the kind of bodies we might be talking about. I mean, some of them we've already discussed and we've had evidence from, but I'm just wondering if there's any others you think specifically this bill should refer to.
Well, again, it was to build that into the bill to future-proof it. You know, ministers already got some ideas around public bodies that they're working with, and have given some examples around, I think, like SNH and SEPA and, you know, places where, you know, government officials work. It's there to provide that option and that flexibility. You know, there could be a role for the NHS going forward. There is a bit of an issue we need to work on just now, where I did do some research into access to PD products for patients in hospitals, and not a single health board in Scotland had a policy. So that was meaning that there was a huge variation in access, and some nurseries were having to provide their own products, a bit like teachers doing it in schools. So, you know, I've raised that with the government. The Cabinet Secretary for Health has made a commitment that the Chief Nursing Officer will sort that out, working with the health boards. But that's drifted on, and we need to go back to that. So, again, I'm not suggesting that, right, okay, we'll put in legislation about the NHS have to do that. But again, it's where you get that drift where if it's not quite formal policy, it's not quite legislation, then it falls down the order of priorities. So again, the bill is designed to give maximum flexibility and to make sure that we can future-proof.
Okay, thanks, Monica.
Okay, thank you. Graham, you wanted to come?
Yeah, thanks again, convener. So just following up on that point, if you just keep expanding the number of public bodies that are in this scheme, then it stands to reason that the cost just keeps growing. Would you accept that?
Well, this is about people, you know, primarily women and girls accessing products, and that's why the approach looks at the cost of products and then the uptake of those products. So we would
add to the list of public bodies that are obliged to take part in this scheme, the more the costs go up. Is that not correct?
Well, again, the bill is giving the ministers the power that other public bodies could be mandated, but there would have to be consultation before that would happen. So right now, I would say it is a hypothetical because it's a ministers may do it in future. But again, I think there's an aspiration that we want to see more employers provide period products like we have in this Parliament, like we have in government buildings. So again, my understanding of what the Cabinet Secretary said is that the government is seeking to do this anyway with SNH, with SEPA, with Transport Scotland and others like that. So that work will have to be funded, I guess, already by the government. Yeah.
Yes, it'll have to be funded, and according to your bill, it's the government that'll have to fund it. There's a very sort of woolly phrase around funding, which I've quoted before. The Scottish ministers may make such payments as they think appropriate to any of these bodies. We don't know how many may be involved. So this is section 8. So this is all about payments from government.
Yes.
So clearly a government could say, well, we don't think that figure's appropriate. So, you know, the funding's not going to be set in stone by this. Any government, and governments change, could decide to pull the funding if this wording gets through. Do you not? So even, you know, the bill, for all its laudable aims, if it gets through, you're not guaranteed that you're going to have an all singing, all dancing scheme here.
So, Section 8 is, again, when you're trying to draft a members' bill and draft legislation, you look at what's been done before and what's quite common practice. So it was felt that Section 8 would allow ministers flexibility on the best way of balancing demands on public funds with ability to offset costs arising. And I've heard some feedback that the bill is too rigid, and I've heard that the bill is too vague. This, again, is designed to give that flexibility so that this can be addressed, you know, in future. I think just in the general principles, I mean, if we're looking at this government are saying the right things in terms of what their intentions are, and they want to work in collaboration with other public bodies. And, you know, we would always expect government to be, or future governments to be reasonable. But again, this is very common in terms of other legislation. I don't have all the examples just now, but I can share that with the committee because I haven't just plucked it out of nowhere. You know, I've looked at other bills, other acts to see what the sort of general approach has been.
It may be common, I've no idea, but we can only deal with what's in front of us, and what's in front of us allows the ultimate flexibility for funding. So clearly that
Yeah.
could mean that this scheme that you want may not be properly funded. Would you accept that just based on the wording? Whether this wording's been used or not, would you accept that that wording does not guarantee proper funding in future?
Well, what I would say is that we have to look at how the public sector operates right now, and any provision requiring ministers to fully fund statutory obligations on public bodies would be highly unusual. So again, I'll come back to the committee with the examples to back that up. You know, we could take an approach that, you know, money has to be absolutely guaranteed for this, but when ministers are negotiating revenue budget settlements with public bodies, they could just then shave some money off something else because other things are not protected in the way that I think Graham Simpson is describing. So I don't need to rehearse the way that, you know, for example, COSLA and ministers negotiate on budgets. So again, I don't think that is a big area of concern, but I can understand Graham Simpson's questions. I'm happy to come back with further examples.
I want, convener, if I can, just to ask a bit about costs and a health issue. So there's been a lot of figures bandied about what period products cost. We've asked in this committee, we've asked witnesses what they sort of pay per month. So I had a look myself what things cost in supermarkets. Now, before I give the figures, I accept everyone is different. Every woman is different. They'll use different amounts. But if we base this on using, let's say tampons, 6 tampons a day for 6 days. Now, I do accept everyone's different, but based on that, a well-known brand would cost £3.42 a month. Only £3.42 a month. A supermarket own brand, £1.72 a month, and then that you can take that right down to a well-known German chain, £1.26 a month. So these are not massive figures. Now, I do accept everyone's different. This stuff is not costing a lot for a lot of women. So based on that, where is the issue? What's the issue here that you're trying to solve?
So Graham Simpson has picked out some figures, and I appreciate you've said that everyone's product use will be different, because some people have very heavy periods and have to change products more regularly than others. So I'm not sure who you have in mind when you're thinking about the one packet a month or whatever. But so costs do vary. I've in the financial memorandum on page 3, I think it is. I won't read them all out, but I can refer you to that section. So the table gives average prices based on supermarket own branded towels, and the same for tampons. So you'll see that for a branded tampon, for example, Tampax or Lilette's, between 10 and 14 pence, an average price per unit of 12 pence. So we've got these figures here that you can look at in the financial memorandum. Some of the costs that you've mentioned are beyond the reach of young people who don't have their own income, are beyond the reach of people who find themselves in insecure work or 0-hour contract. So I know in the early days when this campaign was really getting into the public eye, there was a lot of like pushback from some quarters, particularly on social media, about, oh, is period poverty real? You can go to a pound shop. There is an issue about quality and dignity as well. You can buy very, very cheap products, but you could find yourself sitting in the classroom worried sick that you're going to leak and there's going to be blood on your chair and you're not going to feel confident taking part in PE and sport, for example. And I know that the work the Children and Young People Commissioner's Office did a couple of years ago, they looked at participation in sport, dropping off around the age of 13, 14, girls compared to boys. These are some of the realities. So I agree that most people can afford to meet their monthly needs buying supermarket products. I'm in that category and there's no issue there. But for those people who can't afford it, this universal scheme will be a lifeline, and that's fundamentally what the bill is about.
I get that, but based on these figures, and you've said it yourself, most people can afford, let's say it's less than a £5 a month, and some, I accept that some women pay more than that. So maybe we don't need a universal scheme based on these figures. Can I ask about women who do use far more than that? Because we heard when we visited Perth the case of women who have conditions like endometriosis, and one woman who spoke to us there is paying as much as £50 a month because she has a medical condition. But she's got this medical condition that means she needs a lot of products, but she can't get those products on prescription. And you would have thought that if you've got a medical condition that requires you to use certain things, you might be able to get that on prescription. Do you not think that should be the case?
So it's a good some good insight into that person's experience. The universal scheme would address the needs of that woman that you've outlined, and anyone else who's in that situation. I know for women who are perimenopausal, they start to experience very heavy bleeding, and menopause, it's not an illness. This is just part of our normal cycle and part of a woman's normal life. There's also issues when women are coming off like long-term reversible contraception. And there's some issues right now around like waiting times, but sometimes there can be a lot of bleeding after that. And I mentioned the example of miscarriage. Again, some of the taboos that we don't openly speak about, and people are entitled to their privacy. But for women who have experienced pregnancy loss, it's possible that their own family and friends didn't even know they were pregnant. So the whole thing is then kept a secret. So the universal scheme, everyone in those situations could benefit from that. We start to go back to the Cabinet Secretary's comments about equality and dignity.
Stop you there. I know you're in full flow there.
Sorry.
But your universal scheme, I don't see how that can capture somebody who needs 50 quid's worth of products every month. They're not going to trot up to the local library or sports centre and grab as much as that. If it was covered by prescription, you could go to a pharmacy and get what you need for the month, and it's quite a lot. Do you not accept my point that if you've got a medical condition that requires you to use that much, you should get that on prescription.
Well, in principle, I believe that anyone in that situation should be able to access products. That's what the bill would achieve, and the scheme, which ministers have the freedom to design, could be done in a way that would capture that experience. If others want to have further discussion about the prescription approach, I think we can have that. It's not something that's in the bill at the moment, but I think there's a balance between, do we start to medicalise this and talk about menstruation as an illness, or talk about this as a well-being issue. But I think we have to be careful that we're not going to further stigmatise women because they have endometriosis. I mean, Endometriosis UK have signed the open letter that I mentioned today. They are very serious about menstrual well-being, and we'll do more work with them in the cross-party group on women's health. They and many, many others say that the approach in this bill is the right approach, and they want us to agree to those principles and then do some of that fine-tuning work at stage 2.
Okay.
Thank you, Annabelle.
Thank you. Monica, turning to the issue of the financial memo, because obviously that has been the cause of a lot of discussion that the committee has had thus far. Would the member not, perhaps in hindsight, regret not having done more work on the financial memorandum?
So, as I said in my earlier remarks, the costs are based on unit costs, and the table on page 3 sets out those costs and their sources below that. Where I've been able to access information that's in the public domain, Scottish Government documentation and so on, that's been factored in, and I've said to Government where there's any disparity about projected costs and some of the assumptions have been built in around possible administrative costs and bureaucracy, as it's been called. Let's have that discussion. I think the government do need to be more transparent about how they've arrived at some of those figures. But these are the costs that have come from the Aberdeen pilot scheme, and members are familiar with the work of Hay Girls, who are working very closely with Scottish Government and other public providers. And Hay Girls gave evidence at this committee in December about their unit costs, which are very close to mine.
Well, I thank you for that. But I mean, obviously, we've had conflicting information from the Scottish Government on many of the issues you've just referred to. In terms of the fact that, as you have confirmed this morning, which is helpful for the committee, that the key principle of your bill is to create a universal right. And although you've already said, again this morning, that most women can afford period products, but your bill, and you've said that this is a die-in-the-ditch part of the bill that you wouldn't accept Amendment 2, that the creation of this universal right, would that not in effect involve the creation of a new public service in Scotland, with all that that would entail?
So the member is right that there is a point of principle at the very heart of this, and that's why in my opening statement I said this really comes down to, do you support a universal approach that doesn't put up any barriers or reinforce stigma, or do you want a targeted approach that means you have to find out, is someone low income enough to qualify for this? And I've said that the Scottish Government's own evaluation of the scheme in Aberdeen, that really important pilot scheme, provided that feedback and that evidence that people didn't want intrusion and they wanted to be able to access a scheme in a dignified way. Because there's been so much good work already, I wouldn't say that this needs to be set up as a new public body or service, because it's about supporting that localism that Sarah Boyack referenced. So we're not starting from scratch. That really important work is already underway. It's well established in some places. I talked about some of those early pioneers who've kind of spurred everyone else on. So a big sort of thank you to them. So that work is happening. And I haven't heard anyone say from any party, we might want to start roll back on this, but that could happen in the future. So that's why I do believe that legislation gives that certainty. But no, I'm not anticipating the creation of a new public body. I mean, if we can have a legal right for prisoners to access period products, if we can you know, if we can make it a legal requirement for toilet paper and hand wash and running water to be provided in public bathrooms, then we can do this. You know, we're not starting from scratch.
No, I hear what the member
Yeah.
says, and I wasn't suggesting a new public body. I said a new public service. The two things not necessarily the same. In terms of the fact, though, that, and I mean, in terms of the overarching objective, we all agree that we want to address period poverty. So I think we all agree that, and I say that every time we discuss this. But what the key provision of the bill would do is to impose the requirement to set up a universal service, to create a universal right, okay, as a matter of law. And therefore, there would need to be a Scotland-wide a delivery mechanism to ensure that should any individual in Scotland, be it the women you say can afford it or not, seek to exercise that right, which they would be perfectly entitled to do, further to your bill, then there would have to be the ability to service that right, which would require a different approach actually from the Scottish Government at the moment, as the member knows, which is not taking, that approach is taking the approach of trying to tackle period poverty so that those who need the help get it. But your bill, that you have already stated this morning, would create a universal right. So there would have to be this mechanism set forth. Now, earlier the member said in talking about the unit cost, and I think we've kind of dealt with the unit cost issue quite a few times, but the member also referred to other things being lumped in to that by the Scottish Government. But these things being lumped in are things like, well, how is this going to be delivered? What system, the member said it was bureaucracy, but what system would need to be in place to ensure this delivery? We haven't really got to the bottom of the postage costs or the alternative to that. Looking at local delivery, I mean, GPs and pharmacies would be a kind of obvious route and would be a less intrusive route for women. But again, that comes at a cost. So it's not with respect lumping in these things have to be factored in so that if this right is created, every single person who is entitled to exercise that right can be assured that the state can service them in so doing. So with regard to these additional, and of course the issue of the appeal mechanism that I referred to last week and raised with the Cabinet Secretary, there would have to be some form of legal system to ensure that the right could be respected if an individual felt that the state wasn't meeting its obligations. So what assessment of all these additional items has the member made in terms of cost?
There was a lot in there, so apologies if I don't manage to capture all of the points. So again, to reinforce the point that it's about general principles, so I accept that some members might be struggling to accept the general principles. Some members might feel, yes, period poverty exists, but we want to address this in a very targeted approach, and that will be a choice for individual members to make. I think there is a lot of support and evidence to say that a universal approach is the right one for all the issues around dignity and equality that I've mentioned. In terms of delivery, to pick up on one of your points and whether there needs to be a system introduced. So if I maybe focus on the education providers for now. So in most schools, colleges and universities, what we're seeing is a small basket or a small box placed in a toilet. Not every toilet, but in a toilet with some products in it, a bit like what we have in the Parliament, and that gets topped up with other washroom supplies. So the person who has responsibility for replenishing the toilet roll and the hand towels tops up the period products. And there's been no feedback about people abusing it or schemes being completely depleted and running out and people can't access them. But if we start to hear that feedback, it'll be important to learn from that and how we can improve it. So when I talk about maybe pushing back on this sort of a bureaucracy, to me it's quite a simple approach. You know, if the products are in an office, then there's no set-up costs for that. If they're in a basket, you buy a basket. They can be sourced quite cheaply. So that covers the education. I don't know if that helps.
Well, I mean, obviously
Annabelle,
there would be many, in terms of the member's bill, there would be many scenarios out with the education sector, and that's kind of the nitty-gritty of
Well, I can
what
come
we've
on
been
to
talking
your examples about GPs and pharmacies. So ministers may choose under how they draft the universal scheme and the regulations to include GPs and pharmacies as partners and as providers or collection points, however you'd want to draft it. Again, the bill doesn't mandate that. That is up to ministers to decide in future. I know that in one of the letters from the Cabinet Secretary, she talked about a concern that there could be implications for the NHS and for GPs who are, you know, independent providers. I would like to think we can be more ambitious in this, because actually if we're trying to encourage culture change rather than see that as a negative and as a threat, you know, for the point that Graeme Simpson made about women with conditions, you know, what about women who go to their GP or their nurse practitioner for a cervical smear test or for an internal examination and experience bleeding while they're still within the surgery? You know, I would like to think, as we're now in 2020 and as we go forward, that GPs and others working in healthcare would think, actually, why are we not providing some products in a basket? It's not that onerous, and actually, if we're respecting people and understanding the needs of women, that's something we could do. But again, the bill doesn't mandate that, but those are the kind of things I'd like to see happen in future.
Me just a second. Can I just ask Monica Lennon, what the outline that you've just given us there about doctor surgeries, does that not just highlight the voluntary approach that doctor surgeries should be saying we should, as a matter of course, we should have these in here because it's the sort of thing that people that are coming in to see us may well need? So there would be no need for the universal approach then?
So I've given that example because the Cabinet Secretary raised a concern that this could be onerous for GPs. So she wasn't saying, oh, I'd like GPs to do it in future. She was flagging that up as I suppose another, you know, kind of a concern. I believe that the universal approach is the right one because then no one gets left behind. I'm quite confident that the system wouldn't be abused, that people would use it on the basis of need, and the scheme can be devised in a way that facilitates that. In terms of who the main partners would be, it's clear there's a very, very close relationship between government and COSLA on this, so it could be that we build on the good work that's already happening in community centres and leisure centres, but beyond that there's no stipulation in this bill that it has to be any one particular partner or provider.
Just a few more questions at this point, if I may, Kabira. Well, I thank you for that. I mean, you referred, you know, in that scenario and indeed throughout the evidence session thus far this morning to the scheme that's to be devised and all the rest of it. You've already said that this is to be a framework bill, but it seems to me, with all due respect, that there's no framework actually set forth in the bill. But in terms of, going back to the cost, what maximum annual figure would you think it reasonable to spend on the approach that you suggest in your bill on the part of the public purse per annum? What would be the maximum figure you think would be reasonable for the Scottish Government to earmark for this proposed approach?
So my understanding is that the Scottish Government, from a principal point of view, is saying that they believe that everyone who needs products should have the right to access them. You know, we've heard Nicola Sturgeon say these are not luxury items, they are essential items. So I think there is broad agreement here that we all want to address the need that exists to eliminate period poverty and to make sure that people can live in period dignity for the different reasons that have been outlined, whether it's health related or some other circumstances. So if we believe that that's the approach we want to take, then the costs will reflect what the actual need is. My concern is right now, and the government I think have accepted this, that there are gaps. So the targeted approach is missing some people out. So whatever the government's doing now, I'm sure privately they recognise that they will have to perhaps do a bit more work, and that might increase the cost now. But the approach that I've taken is to look at the cost of products as they are now in terms of the market. I believe there's a role here for the manufacturers and retailers to look at their own costs, and there's a lot of good work around that, including the cost of vending machine products. But this is about doing the right thing, which I believe that most of us want to do. And I think that we can, through good practice, through efficiency, and through really supporting people who want to begin to use reusable products, particularly the Moon Cups. It's becoming popular, but sometimes they can be quite pricey to buy. So we want to try and influence that. But I really believe that the financial memorandum has been very clear about how I've arrived at these figures. I hear what Annabelle Ewing's saying about there's no framework to this. I do disagree, and I think the principle is very clear. I accept that the Scottish Government disagree on that right now and want to do something that's targeted, and that's where I think the main difference lies. But in terms of the scheme and ministers having complete freedom to devise that, I think that gives the flexibility that everyone wants to see.
Well, I mean, obviously, as the member recognises, the Scottish Government has, you know, over a very short period of time, actually created quite a headwind on the ground in terms of delivery, world leading. We've heard already that gaps are recognised, are being addressed. The Cabinet Secretary herself said last week that she felt, given all of that activity, that this bill, apart from any other consideration, was somewhat premature, and we should allow this innovative co-production approach to continue. But in terms of the key issue of cost, it is as a result of the members' proposed approach, which is to create a whole system for delivery to a whole host of people who don't actually need the product, as the member herself said this morning, which takes away then from those who do need the product and the resource that should be and will be, I understand, invested in that. That is the key issue here. And, you know, in that regard, what would the member see cut from the Scottish Government budget, from the Cabinet Secretary's budget, to pay for the approach that she proposes, which is much, much more expensive than the approach the Scottish Government is taking, to provide a service that the member herself has said this morning that most women do not need? So what worthy item of the Scottish budget would the member be prepared to see money taken away from to pay for a whole area of delivery that actually most women don't need? And in that regard, the member herself said this morning, as regards the example of negotiating with COSLA, she said shave the money off something else. Well, what is the something else that the member would shave the money off?
So, again, I think it's worth repeating that no one will be forced to take products. This is very much opt-in.
Be there in case they do. So.
Well, no one will be forced to take the product. People in education can take or leave product. So if you have tampons and pads in your bag and you go to the bathroom, the reality is you're going to use your own. So in terms of whether people choose to use them or not, it's a choice that people will take. In terms of whether people will go to a local community centre. So, for example, I'm looking at Kenny Gibson, Kilwinning Library, who've got a good scheme in place. You can choose to make that journey to go and get the product, or you can choose to stay at home and go to your nearest pharmacy or supermarket. So people will make these choices, but I would really repeat that the written evidence to the committee, the written evidence to the consultation on the bill, you know, the letters that you'll be receiving and emails you'll be receiving, is that people want this safety net for everyone. But I agree with members that most people can afford the products and most people intend to buy their own products. So that's why I'm not agreeing that these costs are going to run away. I actually think that as we see good practice develop, the costs will decrease. I think it's a really exciting opportunity around reusable products and plastic-free products. I think that the culture change we all want to see around other employers getting out there and doing it will improve access more generally across society. So it's not all going to be provided or supported through public bodies. But I don't accept the premise of Annabelle Ewing's question, because I don't agree with the projections the Scottish Government has put forward. That's where the Cabinet Secretary and I really need to have that discussion next week, and hopefully she'll publish more detail on that.
Thank you for that. I mean, I didn't hear where as in the member's words, the money is to be shaved off something else. I didn't hear the answer to that, but I think I've run out of my time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Andy?
Thanks very much indeed, Convener. And welcome the member here today. I mean, you said in your opening remarks at this stage, obviously the legislative process, this is about whether the committee recommends to Parliament that it agrees the general principles of the bill rather than the detail in itself. Is it fair to say that the general principles of this bill are captured by section 1.1 of the bill? That everyone in Scotland who needs to use period products has the right under this part to obtain free of charge?
The bill. Yes.
That'd be a fair summation of the principle, in fact, as said. Yeah, that's fine. Thanks very much indeed. Do you know anywhere else in the world where there's a scheme that provides a statutory right free of charge? Or would this be, in your knowledge, the first?
So, to my knowledge, the bill in its entirety, in terms of its full scope, it would be the first in the world. There are other examples of legislation that does part of this. So in New York, for example, a bill was passed a few years ago now to mandate free provision in schools, homeless shelters and in prisons. There's legislation in Kenya. It doesn't go as far as this bill. And I'm in touch with academics and activists in the States who are giving me updates on what's happening in different states in America. So there's some good work. I've had a message of solidarity today from Homeless Period Dublin, who back what we're doing, and they're saying that this is heating up as an issue in Ireland. There's good practice underway in Wales and in England as well. And initially in England, the campaign Free Periods, they were proposing that the education provision could be tagged to or sort of pegged to free school meal entitlement. And then they found out there was cross-party support in Scotland for the approach that we're taking now in our education sector. So they've lifted their sights and their ambitions. So I think we're all spurring each other on, I would say. But yeah, I think in terms of the scope of this bill, which would provide the universal scheme of access, that would be the first of its kind.
That's useful. But in your answer there, you confirmed that in fact there is legislation elsewhere in the world, in municipalities, in US states, etc., that provide for a statutory framework for the provision, maybe not universal, whatever. Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. Can I revisit a question that Graham Simpson was asking about payments? And I'm particularly keen to understand what the bill is actually saying in law. Part 5.1 of the bill, for example, places a duty on schools, universities and colleges to make period products available free of charge for pupils or students who need to use them. So that's a very clear statutory duty that's placed upon them.
Could you repeat that part?
Sorry, section 5.1, in each school...
2, yeah.
Yes, sorry. In each school, university and college, the education provider must make period products available free of charge for pupils or students who need to use them. So as I read that, that's a very clear statutory duty being placed on particular parties. In section 8 of the bill, it then goes on to say that Scottish ministers may make such payments as they think appropriate to those obliged under this Act to make these period products available free of charge. Is my understanding correct that Scottish ministers do not have an obligation to pay for it? That if this bill were to become law, broadly as it stands at the moment, and a future government were to decide for budgetary reasons it wasn't willing to make any payments or only a small amount of payments, that the people who have a duty to provide would still have to provide by law. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. The member will see that the way it's drafted is very much ministers may make such payments.
Helpful, thanks very much indeed. Can I just move on to the question of rights? And this may seem a bit kind of pedantic, but it's potentially important. I don't know. So section 1.1 of the bill says, everyone in Scotland who needs to use period products has the right under this part to obtain them free of charge. What is the meaning of the words who needs to use? Is that to be interpreted as people who, because of their biology, require them and need to use them? Or is it to be interpreted as people who have needs like that but can't afford to meet those needs themselves? Or is there really nothing to explore there? I'm just barking up the wrong tree.
So that part of the bill which establishes the right, it's about making sure that everyone who menstruates, who needs period products, has the right to access them.
Okay, right. Because that becomes important in terms of the kind of line of questioning that Annabel Ewing was coming up with in terms of how does one uphold these rights. So if, for example, I don't know, let's say in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire, I mean, I could pick anywhere, I'm not picking them out, just any, a defined geographic area in Scotland. Let's say for the sake of argument this bill becomes law, broadly as it stands, and in a particular geographic area of Scotland, there are no products available. None are being made available. The education authorities are not making them available. What is the recourse of a citizen who has the right under Part 1, Section 1? What recourse do they have? Is it judicial review? Is it what? How would they seek to uphold that right if duty holders were failing?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question because I know that it's a point that's been pressed by Annabel Ewing in previous sessions. So again, I've made the argument that the only way to guarantee that schemes continue or exist at all is to have legislation, and that does place duties on Scottish ministers and on others. With any legislation, we need compliance. You know, we need compliance with the law, and people need to be aware that they have rights and know how to access those rights. So that's fundamental to the laws of Scotland. Now, sometimes things can go wrong and people don't comply with the law or meet their duties. I would hope that wouldn't be a particular issue about this particular bill. You know, we have lots of legislation, we have lots of compliance across the public sector, but I think that's why the universal scheme and any guidance that would underpin that, which will all be developed in consultation, would make clear about standards and what would happen if, for example, an authority like, I don't know, City of Edinburgh just refused to make products available. I don't anticipate that happening. I think the risks of that are low. But fundamentally, I'm not a lawyer. I know others in the committee are, but people would be entitled to ask legal advice on that.
Well, you have a lawyer with you, and I don't know if you might invite Claudia Bennett to, because my question simply is a matter of law.
Sure.
What would be the mechanism by which any citizen who felt, maybe wrongly or maybe rightly, that their rights were not being upheld, how would they seek to obtain to uphold their rights?
Yes, thank you for giving me the opportunity to explore this. So the bill gives puts clear duties on Scottish ministers and on public authorities, and by law there is an obligation to comply with such statutory duties, and that's why it was felt that there is no need to make express reference in the bill to any appeal mechanism, because there's such an obligation to comply with statutory duties. Any consequences for non-compliance are dealt with generally by the rules of administrative law. So, as you've mentioned, I mean, the ultimate mechanism is judicial review, but that's obviously a last resort. There are various other mechanisms that would be available. Just to give two examples, under the Court of Session Act, for example, a court can order specific performances if there is a failure, and if there is then, after such an order, a persistent failure, then that would be dealt with through contempt of court, by way of contempt of court. Another example would be through the there's a mechanism in the Local Government Act. So if, for example, someone notified the Scottish ministers that education authority or a public body wasn't complying with a duty, then the Scottish ministers could investigate this, and then they could direct the public body to comply with the duty. So there are various different mechanisms that are available under administrative law.
Okay, that's that's very helpful. So in a sense, the various mechanisms available, administrative law, which are available in terms of a wide range of statutes, would be available in this bill, and the member therefore is it right that you don't feel there should be any special procedures built into this to ensure those rights are upheld, because you believe that the existing administrative law systems would be adequate? Is that fair?
Yeah. Yes.
That's fair. Okay, thanks very much. Can I just look at section 2(4)? So you say the period product scheme, which the bill requires ministers to draw up, shall be operational not later than 12 months after royal assent. Now, on the assumption that this passes at stage 1, and that is an assumption, it would probably pass into law sometime in, I don't know, say late March. Royal assent would be, I don't know, is it 2 weeks? I'm not sure. April. So we're talking about sometime in the spring 2021 that this scheme must be operational by. Now, we've heard that the government is undertaking quite a bit of work, which you yourself, and I think nobody has questioned the commendability of. We've also heard that lessons are being learned, that reviews are planned, I think, later this year. Do you accept that perhaps making it law that the scheme should be operational not later than 12 months might be pushing it a bit?
I do accept the points that Andy Whiteman's laid out, and I have said that, you know, I'm willing again to be flexible there in that part of the bill could be amended. I can't recall exactly when the government said that they'll report on their evaluation schemes, but I recognise that that work is underway. So yeah, I'd be willing to lodge amendments at stage 2.
Okay, so you're willing to be flexible around that point.
Yes.
That's helpful. I just wonder, you mentioned this letter that's been published today, which I've just seen here, from 30 or so organisations. And they say in the letter, the passage of the Period Products Free Provision Scotland Bill is an important step towards normalising menstruation and helping to end the stigma around periods. Given that the under health and safety law legislation, workplaces are required to provide toilet and washing facilities that are adequate, that adequate means that they should be clean, adequate means a supply of toilet paper, adequate means for female employees a means of disposing of sanitary dressings, adequate means enough soap, adequate means a basin large enough, a means for drying hands, showers, etc. Does normalisation, in the words of the letter and in your understanding, is it fair to say that that normalisation, would bring it into the normalisation that is associated with the expectation, indeed the legal expectation, that in a workplace, in sanitary facilities and bathrooms, you have soap, sanitary product disposals, hot water, etc. Is that kind of what normalisation to you means? Or does it mean a broader sort of cultural thing that we don't sort of not talk about these things and they're rather more normal part of discourse? Where does it sit?
So thank you for mentioning the letter. I'm not one of the signatories, so I think I might be a recipient of the letter. But I suppose to answer your question, it's probably about both. I mean, I think the scenario you've talked about in terms of current statutory requirements around toilets and what needs to be provided at the moment. And it is ironic that there's legislation that says there must be provision for disposal of sanitary dressings, which again is quite archaic language, but there's no provision for the provision of period products. And I guess looking at the letter now, normalisation of menstruation, there is a lot of stigma. I think everyone accepts that. You know, periods have been something that have been discussed in hushed tones, and I think across the world there's 5,000 euphemisms for periods. I think we are breaking down some of those barriers and recognising that periods are not something dirty. It's not an illness. It's nothing to be ashamed of. That's a normal part of life. So yes, I think there is wide recognition across Civic Scotland that this bill can really play a huge part in ending that stigma.
Okay, thanks, Convener.
Thank you very much, Alexander.
Thank you, Convener. I mean, it's quite obvious, Ms Lennon, that there's a good understanding and appreciation of the principles of your bill. And throughout this morning, there's been some very in-depth questions to you about all of that. And you've already indicated the flexibility that you have to try and ensure that it does progress and amendments will come at stage 2. And you've touched on the voucher and the C card, and we've heard barriers and access to that, but you identify that and you acknowledge that at this stage. Last week, when I questioned the Cabinet Secretary about the bill itself, I asked her if it would, in the current form, jeopardise the current system that the Scottish Government have in place. And she indicated in her response that she felt that that may well be the case, that it would jeopardise and that it was probably premature at this stage. It would be good to get your views on that.
Thank you for your question. And I think you were part of the visit in Perth this week, so hopefully some of that outreach work has maybe helped to answer perhaps your own question. So I don't agree that the legislation is premature. I don't agree that legislation is unnecessary. There is nothing in this bill that would in any way stop or run into what government are doing already. And if we are all believing the same thing, I'm looking at the letter that the Cabinet Secretary sent to the committee yesterday. Scottish Government is firmly committed to period products being available to all those who need them. That is the starting point. So I think that the bill can lock in the good work, guarantee it continues in future, and let us all continue in a very positive approach.
And the targeted approach, ensuring that individuals who need them, I still think that the language reference around that is still looking at a targeted approach. Because as we've already heard today, there's a vast array of products and there's a vast array of requirements depending on the age, the different circumstances that any female would find themselves in, depending on if they have an ailment that creates them needing to have many more products than would be the norm. So I think that in itself creates some difficulties. But when you look at the range of products and the standard of products, at present, I think the range and standard that is provided under the targeted scheme provides a good array of that. Under your own scheme, there has been suggestions that the quality may differ because it's going to be looked on price. We've already heard today from the financial memorandum, etc., that there would be more anticipated to be spent, and that could have a knock-on effect on the quality and the range of products that may well then be provided. Your views on that?
So I think, yes, Alexander Stewart is correct that women's needs can differ. That's why we have products in different sizes, different absorbency levels, and so on. So that range of products to meet different needs and choice is important. Just to be clear, I mean, this won't be my scheme if this bill passes. It will be the Scottish Government's scheme and successive governments. So the bill happens to be sponsored by me, but there's a lot of people who want this to happen, and it will be the ministers. It will be up to them, and they'll have my full support for whatever they choose to do. Again, just to repeat points made already, that the ministers will have complete flexibility about how the scheme is written and devised, and the guidelines and guidance that goes with that. So there is nothing on the face of this bill that influences price and quality. Right now,
Complete flexibility when it will be a budgetary recommendation, it will be a budgetary consideration. And we've already heard from COS and others that they cannot afford, they need it to be fully funded. Now, if it is to be fully funded in the that you required, and you would see that has to have, and that will have an impact on what may well be provided because of the cost that will be incurred.
So again, the important point for today and coming weeks is that we need to sort of take a view on the principles of the bill, whether we support the principles or not, and hopefully there's more clarity, because there might have been some misunderstandings about the principle, but I've been very clear about that and about the universal approach. I think members want maximum flexibility in the scheme, and that's why the bill is drafted as it is. It gives ministers full ownership of the scheme and any guidance and any future amendments to that. In terms of funding, I recognise the concerns. I know that some colleagues will feel that local government isn't fairly funded and others will. And these are political points that we don't need to get into today. But the way that budgets are set and negotiated is the way it's always been. So we've made it clear that the bill provides that ministers may provide that funding. But again, it's given that flexibility and future-proofing that I think we all want to see. So if people want flexibility, I hope I can reassure them that this bill gives maximum flexibility.
Going back to Ms Ewing's question, if there is a cost element in this, and there is, then something else has to give if it is to be fully funded to the quality and the support that is required, for example, across local government, where it may well be a constraint that they do not find that they have the resource available. So to ensure that that resource is available, something else would have to give.
I don't accept that. I understand where you're coming from with the question, but we've heard very strongly about the cost of not doing this, about the people who find themselves living in period poverty, the people who can't experience period dignity. We've talked about some of the barriers today. The current schemes don't necessarily have a remedy for the woman like Graham Simpson described, who has really heavy periods and finds that very expensive to manage. So I think there's an opportunity in doing this. We've heard about the benefits in terms of productivity, about participation, about quality of life, about the benefits to education. This is an investment in our young people, an investment in women. It's about making sure that all women and girls feel valued. And I think it is, whilst I've heard COSLA's evidence and commentary, COSLA agree with the principles of the bill. They've told us that in evidence. So again, the principles are clear. I think there is broad support for the principles. If we get to stage 2, we can get further clarity, and by then I'll have met with the Cabinet Secretary as well. So I think Engender and others made the point about the cost of not doing this.
And you're right to identify that, because that is the case. But at the same time, you have to take on board that we will not be able to provide what you may be asking for if there is not the resource, if there is not the support. The principle is fine, but trying to ensure that it does happen may well be a bigger problem for the future.
Mm-hmm. So again, I would say I think members broadly accept that most people can afford products and most people want to continue to buy and source their own products. There are people, unfortunately, who find that very difficult because of poverty and lack of income and other barriers, some of which, I mean, I've tried to give as many examples as possible today, but some of the interesting work with, refugees and asylum seekers, people for whom English is not their first language, people who experience cultural barriers, sometimes because of religious beliefs. There's a whole spectrum of people, gypsy travellers. So there's a lot of people who've said this absolutely is required and it's the right thing to do. But I'm really optimistic about how this can be delivered in the future in terms of, you know, achieving good value in terms of the public pound and making sure we do this in a way that is equitable and is reasonable and is sensible. I don't believe it will be abused. There's been no evidence of that in any of the schemes that exist so far. I just think it's a really, you know, essential thing to do. It's progressive, and if we all believe in this principle that products are available to all who need them, this is the approach to take.
There's a couple want to come in, but can you just make it brief, please?
A number of areas I would like to touch on, to be honest, convener, because I mean, for example, you know, Monica, I know you said that recipients should have a choice of products, but how broad should that range be, and what should they be available at all locations, and what is the implications financially of that? Because it's not just about the usage of products as we progress, it's about ensuring there's a sufficient supply initially, and obviously the more products you have and the more locations, then the upfront costs increase.
Thank you. So again, the scheme, that will be up to ministers to develop that. If you're asking me what my preference would be, then it would be a scheme that made a range of tampons, pads and reusable options like moon cups and reusable pads available. I think there is a real opportunity to you know, promote, you know, use of more sustainable products. Again, it's up to ministers what they put in the scheme, but Kenneth Gibson's asked about would it be all locations. That's certainly not what I'm suggesting, and I don't think anyone is. But I think I'm really encouraged by what the Cabinet Secretary says about, you know, the marketing work that the government is about to take forward in an app. So if people have clarity about where they can access products, I think that's the most important point. It's not about you know, the number of locations. So for me, living in Hamilton, of course, it's not going to be every public building in Hamilton. It could be a very small number. But as long as people know how to access that right, which goes back to Andy Whiteman's point about if we're taking a right-based approach, how do people access the right, then it's about that important signposting and public information.
I think Monica provided some real clarity about your approach in terms of universality, but you know, in terms of the finances of this, I'm not getting anything back that we can actually pin down at all, to be honest. I mean, for example, you talked about COSLA agreeing with this, but COSLA have only agreed to the bill if it's fully funded, and they're saying it's 17 pence an item. University's 19p, whereas the financial memorandum is saying 9p a unit. And the issue for that is that in the annex that we received from the letter, the differentials that we've been given in terms of the parameters for this bill over the period of a parliament, with your figures would be £80.4 million and the Scottish Government £216.9 million. Now, over 5 years, so there's a huge disparity in those figures. So that's why I'm trying to pin some of these things down. And you said earlier in response to Annabelle, you said that cost should reflect need when she asked you how much you envisage being spent on this. But every single area of the Scottish budget has a specific budget. The NHS can't just spend whatever they need. The local government can't spend whatever they need. No area, justice can spend whatever they need. Everyone has to live within their own means. So. And you also, went on to say that you believe that costs will decrease over time. I mean, where's the evidence for that? And do you not agree that there has to be some kind of battening down the hatches in terms of the finances on this, regardless of your position on this, of anyone's position on this bill? So
I welcome Kenneth Gibson's further questions on this because, you know, in no way am I being flippant about the financial memorandum. It is really important to address cost and funding and affordability. Again, I'm repeating myself, but we are at stage one where we're trying to agree to general principles. But in terms of the costs, so there is disparity between the costs that I've set out and Scottish Government. So I'm certainly not denying that. We've been really clear that we've arrived at a 9p product costs. And that was based on the info available at that time when this was published, and that mostly was drawn from Scottish Government documentation. So again, we've tried to be really transparent about that. It is unclear how we've reached that disparity. So COSLA are talking about 17.6 pence. Education providers are saying 19 pence, and the Scottish Government has a range of 8 pence to 81 pence. I come back to Hay Girls, who gave oral evidence, and they appear to supply many of the products to the schemes that we've been discussing. They are the key partner of Scottish Government. They said to committee that their unit cost was 7.5 pence for a pad and between 9 and 13 pence for a tampon. And they said not quite sure where the other costs are coming from. So again, I hope when I speak to the Cabinet Secretary next week, we'll explore that further. I would say to members that the Scottish Government hasn't explained how this 19.4 million figure has been arrived at, and it doesn't appear to relate to the higher product cost cited in its own submission. So we do need to get into this a bit more, but I can't provide any more answers today because I've been very clear about how I have arrived at the cost in the financial memorandum.
Well, I think what the Cabinet Secretary has been saying is that the financial memorandum doesn't include, for example, the use of products by schoolgirls outside school at weekends and during holiday times, for example. So what they're saying is that the financial memorandum that you've put together, which is all financial memorandums should be based on best estimates, is only looking at that particular period time. And it's not reflecting the wider usage that young girls may have, and therefore, in terms of school, the costs there will be significantly underestimated. So that's one of the things the Cabinet Secretary's saying. I think we would all, regardless of our views on this particular issue, like to see this particular issue pinned down. But I'm sure you would accept that. I know it's already been mentioned that you said we could shave money off something else to fund this, but I think that does set alarm bells ringing, because we really need to know. I think going forward, what kind of figure we're actually talking about if this bill is to be delivered successfully.
So I do believe that costs are coming down. We heard that from North Ayrshire, who are a wee bit ahead in terms of the work that they're doing. And the advice that I've taken from COSLA is that they are seeing costs decreasing because people are getting more efficient, they're getting better at sharing what they're doing. We don't need people just to be working in silos on this. In terms of the school costs, Kenny Gibson is right that the Scottish Government have measured that in a different way from me. So again, a comparison can be made, because my view is that for days where pupils are not in school, they could, if they need to, access a universal scheme. But the way the government's costed it, I think, is from memory, they've calculated it on a, every day of the year, and they've tried to factor in that they might have to provide holiday packs and so on.
I think you hit on an important point when you mentioned North Ayrshire, because we took evidence from North Ayrshire, which is also obviously my own local authority. They actually were kind of pioneers, and they made what they would agree is some mistakes in terms of how they delivered these products, which is understandable. Assumptions were made, and they've corrected them, etc., as times went on. And one of the things I explored with that panel was the need to share best practice. But that's one of the reasons why the Cabinet Secretary is suggesting that legislation is premature at this point. Or she said the Scottish Government would have brought a bill in, because there is so much evolution, so much change, so much innovation that she feels could be stifled by legislation. So I'm just wondering how you feel about that particular issue, because that, along with costings, is one of the real it gets to the real heart of this whole bill, and whether it goes forward or not, and in what form it goes forward if it does.
Mm-hmm. No, I recognise that members are taking the issue of cost seriously, and rightly so. I think it is encouraging that we've heard evidence from people in the know who've been doing it for a while, that they've seen improvements and costs have come down, because although in my head this is not radical, but for many people it is, because they've never really had to think about period products. And that's why I was so surprised when I went to South Lanarkshire College on a visit to the East Kilbride campus at the end of 2016, just as a local visit, as a local MSP, and they brought it up with me. They'd heard about the members' debate, and they said, we want to do this. And at that point, they were investigating the cost of replacing vending machines with free-to-vend machines. And then that's, you're buying in kit and stuff like that. But people seem to have moved away from that approach, and it's very relaxed, informal. There's products in a basket. So there has been that good practice, and I'm encouraged that COSLA, there's more work being done now to bring people together to share the best practice, as well as, you know, in colleges and universities, because they've been an important part of this journey. But where I disagree with the Cabinet Secretary, you know, she hasn't indicated that she thinks that legislation would ever be the right approach. So I think that's where we'll either have to agree or disagree. I've made it quite clear that if we want to guarantee access to products, that legislation would be the way to go.
Just lastly, in terms of costs, you're saying that it's going to go down because of the experiences of North Ayrshire, but that's specifically in schools. I mean, the financial memorandum talks about a 5% increase year on year over a period of a parliament, because more people will become familiar with this, more people will access the services that we provide. It will be available in more facilities, and so the financial memorandum envisages an increase year on year in costs. That's why the costs in the annex range from 80.4 to 216.9 million, because they feel that would be the initial figure being based on your own unit costs, of course. So that's why what makes you think that actual overall costs, which the financial memorandum doesn't reflect, will decrease over time?
So I think there's a couple of documents that can be looked at. The Scottish Government have put forward their assumptions about uptake, and that's how they've arrived at much higher costs. And I don't fully sort of recognise or perhaps agree with the scenarios that they're setting out. What I've tried to do in the memorandum is to look at the cost of products as they are now, and to source all that information that Graham Simpson's been sourcing in the supermarket himself, but to put all that in there, to be transparent about where that's come from. And, you know, it's impossible to say, you know, none of us could say what the uptake would definitely be, but we've talked about, you know, ways that we can make people aware of the scheme and make it accessible to people. We obviously want to see poverty reduce across the whole population, so that people don't find themselves in a bad situation in the first place. But I think there needs to be real discussion between myself and the Cabinet Secretary now, because I don't want people getting distracted by some of the assumptions that are floating around, because the financial memorandum has set out where the figures have come from. I would say, and this is not to be overly critical, but the Scottish Government and their figures haven't really shown their homework on that, and that's where we'll get to that point. So we can unpick some of the assumptions, but I don't in any way minimise the questions or concerns that members have.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kenny. Graham?
Yeah. Thanks. Same issue, really. I think the nub of this is, I think what we found out today is that we actually have no idea what this would cost if this legislation was passed. Nobody has a clue what the total figure would be. We don't know how much it would grow by. We assume it would grow over the years, but we actually don't know. Figures you provided are way different to those of the Scottish Government. So I don't know who's right and who's wrong. We don't know. But at the end of the day, and it goes back to points made by Andy Whiteman and Alexander Stewart, would be passing legislation which would impose a duty on public bodies, let's say councils or schools, to do certain things that come at a cost. And we'd also be passing legislation that doesn't actually compel government, if they chose not to fund that. So you're creating a potentially massive bill for public bodies, councils, schools, whatever, and we have no idea how that will be funded. And I'm afraid there's only a finite amount of money. I think Annabel Ewing's made this point as well. Where So you have to. This is a serious issue when local government is really up against it. In particular, you pass a piece of legislation that creates an extra cost for local government. Whatever you think about the issue, however valid the issue is, and it is valid, you are creating a bill for local government with no guarantee that it will be funded. Something has to give. And I think that's the point that members have been trying to make. Do you not accept that general point?
So my starting point, and I hope it would be the committees, is do we support the general principles of this bill? And members will have to make a choice, yes or no. We've heard compelling evidence about period poverty, about people who struggle to live in period dignity. And if we want to do something about that, then we should back the principles in this bill, which give people a right to access free period products. That's a choice members will have to make, yes or no. If we believe in that principle, then we can get to stage 2, where we can do the fine-tuning, we can amend the bill to make some of the concerns people have a little bit clearer. I would say that, you know, with all due respect, the bill is fully costed. We've based it on the average price of product, and we've set out the framework around that. I believe that the scheme can be delivered economically. I believe that inherent to that would be, you know, very much a focus on delivering good value for the public purse. And, you know, just to repeat that the Scottish Government are delivering similar schemes. So we're not starting from, you know, day zero on this. I think it's really important to bring it back to the people who are telling us that this legislation is essential. Women's organisations, equality groups, anti-poverty charities, the Poverty Alliance are on this letter that you've received. The STUC, who represent 500,000 workers in Scotland, and many trade unions have passed their own motions to say that this legislation is vital. So I go back to the point that Engender and others have made, that there is a cost of not doing this in terms of the hidden poverty and hidden inequality. I think that my talks with the government, you know, can be constructive. We can continue to listen to COSLA and to University Scotland and Colleges Scotland and all those partners who are already committed and involved now. I think we have to capture the very best of what they're doing, look at the lessons in terms of evaluation and efficiency. I take Andy Whiteman's point about the timing in terms of royal assent and the timing of implementation. But I'm not sure that, you know, government can give absolute certainty on anything around the future provision. But I take in good faith what the Cabinet Secretary said to the committee, I think just last night, about ensuring and believing that everyone has the right to access these products.
I don't think that actually answers the point I was making, but I've got one final question from me anyway. You're meeting the Cabinet Secretary next week. Is there anything she could say to you that would persuade you that legislation is not required at this point?
No.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Sarah, you wanted to come in on...
Yep. It's a brief question, and it's been referenced by quite a few colleagues so far, but we've not actually drilled into the nub of it, about environmental and sustainable issues in terms of reusable and plastic-free products. One of the things that came across very strongly at the round table yesterday was the wider issue of education, which sits, or promotion, which either sits as part of a government strategy to promote this bill, should it be passed, or promotion more generally. And I just wanted to get your views on how you would both promote education and knowledge about the whole issue of reusable products. They are not appropriate for everybody, but they are clearly a potential investment that individual people can make. And how would you use the bill to promote that sustainability and that environmental impact issue, which is obviously crucial as part of our climate change approach going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really important. So again, it'll be for ministers to devise a scheme. I know that the other members out with this committee, you know, I've been getting lobbied a lot about, you know, how can we amplify the issues around climate, sustainability, plastic-free options and other issues which not really pertinent to the bill, but a lot of women feel that they're being, you know, marketed with products that are perfumed, etc., they don't actually need and can bring around irritation to skin and infection and so on. So in terms of that wider discussion about menstrual well-being and education, I think there are opportunities. A lot of that can happen out with the bill, but there could be things written into you know, guidance that would come from ministers in future, which helps to steer the scheme. I think Sarah Boyack is right that, you know, moon cups won't be for everyone, just as we same way that tampons are not right for everyone, and there can be some practical challenges around, you know, reusable or washable pads, the same way that some people are using reusable nappies, but not everyone. So there's opportunities there. But I would like to think that a universal scheme could be a real driver in terms of increasing and encouraging uptake of reusables, because, you know, from what I've heard from a whole range of organisations, some of which are on that letter, is that when people are given the chance to try reusable products, which can be more expensive to buy up front, but if they can access them for free, then they're more likely to stick with them. And something like a menstrual cup can last for years. But for some women who are, you know, rough sleeping and homeless accommodation, temporary accommodation, I've heard from, you know, not colleagues here, but some voices have said, you know, the answer would be to give everyone a moon cup, but that's not going to be the answer for everyone, and people in poverty deserve to have some choice too.
Right, thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. And Andy, you wanted to come in?
Just 3 brief points. Would it be fair to say that the sort of fund, I mean, Scottish Government and yourself have some differences. We've heard that on, for example, costings. But would it be fair to say that the fundamental difference between you and the Scottish Government is that they don't believe that legislation is necessary, and you do?
Yes, I would say so for now, but I'm hoping that the Scottish Government, you know, can think again on that. I would say the other difference, I don't want to shy away from it, is that, you know, the Cabinet Secretary has confirmed in our oral evidence and in writing that they are they prefer a more targeted approach, which is different from the universal approach that I have proposed.
Do you agree that if we're talking about rights, and your bill does talk about creating a new right, that it's only law that can actually create rights for citizens? Governments can't create rights for citizens. They can say you have this right, but ultimately that's something that's in their gift to give or to take tomorrow. So that if one's creating a right, and if one believes there should be a universal right, that can only be done by law. Is that your understanding?
Yes, I think it is. I mean, government has said, again, in writing to the committee, that they're committed to a rights-based approach, which I welcome, and that sounds really good. But I want people to know with certainty that the good work that's happening now will continue, and I believe the only way to guarantee that right is through legislation.
Kenny Gibson mentioned COSLA's evidence, and I think he was implying that their support for the bill was conditional on the scheme being fully funded. The evidence from COSLA says COSLA supports the overall aim of the bill, full stop. They then go on to say, however, any scheme that enables this should be fully resourced, accessible, consider the learning from access, etc. So my understanding is COSLA support the bill, that's what they say they do, but they'd like the scheme to be fully funded. But their support for the bill is not conditional on the scheme being fully funded. Have you had any discussions with COSLA in terms of their exact approach to your bill, or have we just got the written evidence? And obviously we had the oral evidence as well.
Yeah, so absolutely COSLA support the overall aim of the bill, and they support the general principles, which is really, really welcome. And I think local authorities are really proud of their role and their input in this. You know, North Ayrshire is one example of a sort of really pioneering early approach. North Lanarkshire, I would say the same, partly through some discussions I had, because it's within my region, but it struck me that Ravenscraig Sports Centre, for example, which is Ravenscraig International Sports Centre, had no period products at all in the ground floor toilets. So you had to go up the stairs and through the cafeteria, and you've got competitors from not just Lanarkshire but all over the world coming. So there was lots of girls, certainly when I was taking my daughter there for gymnastics, running about in white judo and karate suits and gymnastics leotards, but there was no period products. So again, through informal conversations, that was addressed. So there's a lot of good work like that going on. But COSLA would have every right to provide further submissions at stage 2 and if the bill progressed. So I don't see anyone wanting to shut down this opportunity now. I think we've seen from this letter today that there's broad support for the principles of the bill to get beyond stage 1 and then to have that further engagement and scrutiny at stage 2, because, you know, I've made some comments about amendments I'm willing to make, but I know that other members might have their own ideas about amendments, and as might the Cabinet Secretary.
Okay, and just finally, we've heard some discussion this morning in questioning about the uncertainty of the cost and the extent to which that might or might not undermine support for the general principles. In other words, if one doesn't know how much it's going to cost, that might affect one's view on the general principles. I mean, are you aware of any assessment that was made or any statements that were made about what might have to give in budgets when, for example, the health and safety at work legislation required every single workplace in the country to provide toilet paper? Or was that a discussion that just took place that this is what you have to do? I mean,
yeah, well, I think that was well before I was born, but I don't know what discussions took place at the time. But I would say there's lots of initiatives that spring up, you know, like baby boxes, for example, or other provisions that are made, that there's an expectation or a duty on public bodies. I think these things, there's always negotiation, and I think what I've said earlier is that the approach we've taken in this bill is not unique, it's not novel. We've drawn on the experience of other bills, but again, if it's helpful, I'd be happy to provide some of those examples later. But I think we can all, you know, hopefully recognise that important collaboration and partnership working between government, COSLA, and others. COSLA talk about spheres of government, after all, not tiers of government. It has been very much that partnership approach, and things are always done by negotiation and accommodation. I think I will keep in touch with COSLA, which was your question about, you know, have I been in contact with them? Regular contact, and I know that recently they were again reviewing some of the work that they've been doing, and that's why I'm able to say that they're confident that costs are decreasing.
Very much. I've just got a couple of questions, but I'd like to go back to a couple of points Andy raised there just now. COSLA made it clear here, maybe on 3 or 4 occasions, that they supported this, but it had to be fully funded, and their evidence to us. So I don't think that full stop meant that they were in favour of it, no matter what. I think that we're getting a bit confused here when we talk about the general principles of this bill. I think everybody around this table is supportive of the general principles of anybody who needs to get free products, getting free products. Your bill doesn't say that. It says that anybody who needs to use period products can get them free of charge. And I think that's a subtle but very, very important difference. But to take us on to the main questions, I suppose, that I'd like to bring up. Andy, again, referring to Andy, he talked about the private business scenario, about period poverty being in the toilets along with toilet paper, etc. Now, that takes us on to a completely different level of potential costs. If we're talking about private businesses now having these in their toilets. It takes, and if, first of all, I'm not sure the government would have legislative responsibility for that. But secondly, I mean, that would have to be done through a voluntary system. But secondly, if it did, then it would hugely increase the cost.
So there's no proposal for a duty on
No, there's
private?
none. Absolutely not. But when Andy mentioned it, you supported it.
Sorry, I'm not following, convener.
Right,
I'm sorry.
okay. When Andy talked about, when Andy Whiteman talked about the fact that the builders who were part of the letter, saying that, he said that along with toilet paper, soap, blah, 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 period poverty should be in workplaces such as that, you said, yes, you think that was the right idea. You feel free to look back.
Yeah, Andy Whiteman looks puzzled as well, so maybe we need to look back at the visual report. I'm sorry, I'm not
Graham, you wanted to come in here?
following that.
I think for clarity, Andy Whiteman was referring to UK legislation which relates to workplaces and what you need
Yes.
to provide in toilets in workplaces. So that's a regulation which is set at a UK level. It's so that's what it is, convener. It's clearly not what your bill is trying to achieve.
Andy. Sorry,
Perhaps I can clarify. But my first reference to this was in terms of the question of normalisation and what that means. That was a sort of cultural question. The second part was about discussions during the course of passing legislation, like, for example, making it law to provide toilet paper, discussions as to its cost and the impact on budgets. So, to be clear, that's what I was seeking when I was asking those questions.
The response from Monica was that both in terms of normalisation, in terms of culture, and normalisation in terms of it being in there, she supported.
Can you just very briefly pick up on the supplementary in this? I understood well the analogy Andy Whiteman was trying to make, in that, don't look at costs, just look at principle. But, we're in a devolved situation. We have a limited budget in that context, and we must, to discharge our responsibilities as parliamentarians, indeed look at costs. And I mean, last week Andy Whiteman said, in questioning the Cabinet Secretary, I'm not asking about the reality, I'm asking you what the bill says. Well, the rest of us have to deal with reality. So, the fact of the matter is that analogy, apart from other questions you may have about it, actually, in a devolved context, is not a good analogy, because we must consider costs. Is that not the case? We must consider costs.
So at this stage, you must consider the general principles of the bill. It's legitimate to ask a whole range of questions. What I've tried to do today and in written submissions is address some of the misconceptions. I can't speak for the government and how they've arrived at some of the assumptions that they've made, but I do accept that there is a difference where government don't believe there should be legislation, and I do. And I've made it quite clear why I believe there should be a universal approach and a rights-based approach which is enshrined in law, and the government at this stage don't appear to want to do that. And it will be up to members to listen to all of the evidence. Listening to me is a small part of it. There's a whole lot of other people who have given evidence, who can give evidence, and who want to be part of this scrutiny work as the bill hopefully progresses through Parliament. It is clear that this bill does provide a framework, does provide maximum flexibility and scope for the government to design a scheme and to consider how it may wish to fund it. That's probably all I can say to wrap up there.
Quite a fundamental question on that, which is, just to clarify, this bill would require the Scottish Government to set a framework on schools, further and higher education, and would enable them to roll out universal provision as they would define in the future at a point of their choosing on potentially other public bodies. It does not require private organisations like bars and companies to start providing period products in their workplaces, but as part of a wider culture shift, that's something that is hugely desirable, whether or not this bill is passed. Can you just clarify that?
Yes, Sarah Boyack is correct. The bill does not propose any duty on private businesses or private providers. So, for example, you had on the ball here talking about football stadiums, but this bill has nothing to do with football stadiums or private gyms or bars and nightclubs. The second part of the bill is about the education provision. So that has a duty for schools, colleges and universities, and the scheme puts a duty on ministers, and ministers have would have the further power to look at other public bodies, but it's not about private sector.
Thank you. Andy?
Just briefly on that point, I mean, in part 10 of the section 10 of the bill under definitions, it says that public-facing bodies means bodies or other organisations appearing to the Scottish ministers, A, to be bodies or other organisations to the premises of which the public or a section of the public has frequent access, and B, to be otherwise suitable to be specified. Am I correct to take that to mean that that could include, for example, private sports grounds, football clubs?
So I'm just looking at bear with me, I'm looking at that section now. So it's not the intention that we're creeping into private spaces. I'm happy to look at that again if the member or others think we need to tighten that up, but that's not what the intention is. It is about bodies that are defined in law as public bodies.
No, I understand that's not your intention, but my question is about the language that's used in the Act, and it talks about bodies or other organisations to the premises of which the public or a section has frequent access. And one might argue that, for example, a private sports club, I don't know, a tennis club here, the public are frequently accessing that. Every day of the week there's stuff going on. And I just want to, I mean, you can come back later on the meaning of that.
The convener's happy to can bring in other experts on the table here.
Yeah, happy to address that. I think you need to see this in its context, in the context of part one. So the specified public-facing bodies are one of the categories of bodies that the Scottish Government can choose to use as delivery partners. So whether any public-facing bodies, as defined, are brought into the universal scheme is a matter for ministers. It's not anything mandatory. But as Monica said, we're trying to provide maximum flexibility for ministers in exactly how they deliver the scheme within the general parameters that are set out. So if they want to bring in a public-facing body, they have that option. And yes, the definition of that would go beyond what you might describe as public sector bodies. A public-facing body is not the same as a public sector body. So if they wanted to bring in some bodies that are essentially private but are public-facing, they have that option. But there's certainly no requirement on them to do so. And clearly, we would expect ministers to enter into negotiation with any such body, decide whether that's appropriate. It would have to be done with agreement. If it doesn't work out because it would be too expensive or whatever, they can go down a different route instead and just do it through councils or whoever else they want. And that is only in the context of providing a delivery mechanism for people taking up the universal scheme. It is not about imposing requirements on those bodies to provide products in their own toilets, for example. that would be a separate issue. If they wanted to do, to the extent that ministers have the power to impose obligations on other bodies to provide products within their own premises, that's under Section 6, which is entirely separate, and that's not about public-facing bodies.
Okay, that's very helpful, thank you.
I hope that clarifies to some extent.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, thank you. My last question is, there's been a lot of reference to a framework bill. There's been a framework bill, but what framework? I mean, I would have thought that a framework bill was something where you said what you would want to be done and how you expected to do it, and the government filled in the regulations and the specifics round about that. And for me, all I can see is that the framework is that everybody in Scotland who needs to use period products has a right under this part to obtain them free of charge. And pretty much that's it. Because everything else, Monica, you have said that you're willing to amend.
So the answer is the bill does create a framework for the Scottish Government to build on by specifying the minimum criteria that any universal scheme has to meet. I've been open to comments from everyone, and I'm hearing that people want the bill to be as flexible as possible, and I think that's what the bill as drafted delivers. There are issues that can be looked at again and improved upon, but I'm hearing from ministers that they want to have that maximum freedom and latitude, and that's why the bill's drafted the way it is.
Ministers would say that's what they've got just now with the system that's in place just now. That freedom and latitude to work with other organisations.
Well, again, if we're going back to the debate around the need to do this, you know, I would say that whilst there's been some progress, good progress, a targeted approach will see people fall through the net and people will remain in period poverty. I don't want to see that. I want to see legislation that gives people rights, and that's what the bill seeks to do. It's right at the top of the bill, the framework which gives ministers maximum flexibility. That provision is there, and I hear some of the points that have been made, and that's why I'm hopeful that we can agree those principles and get to stage 2 and have further discussion about improvements.
Interesting. Okay, thank you very much. I want to thank Monica Lennon and her supporting officials for attending today's session. As I said earlier, that was our concluding evidence session, and the committee will consider a draft report to Parliament at a later meeting. Before I close, I just want to thank Perth and Kinross Voluntary Service for hosting committee members on Monday. It was an extremely helpful meeting, so thank you to them. That concludes the public part of today's meeting, and I now move the meeting into private. I'll pause to allow the witnesses to leave.